Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Digital Leader Show. We're back after a brief hiatus and start our new schedule next month of shows every first and third Wednesday, live at noon Eastern, 9 Pacific. Each week, we discuss key issues and news at the intersection of business and technology, focusing on automation, AI, and digital transformation in hopes of making you a better digital leader. This week, we're discussing comparing and contrasting RPA and generative AI, insights and lessons learned, plus other headlines for digital leaders from the world of enterprise technology. I'm Dan Goodstein. I head up the Institute for RPA and AI, as well as the Digital Enterprise Institute. We're a professional association, media, and peer-to-peer research network providing education, networking, and advice to over 130,000 members globally, all around automation, enterprise AI, and digital transformation. You can check us out at irpaai.com. And I have with me a new co-host, Chris Surdak, former White House Chief Transformation Officer, Automation and AI Practice Lead at EY, and Executive Partner for Digital Transformation at Gartner. He's an engineer, a futurist, a transformation executive, and best-selling author with over 30 years experience in technology development and deployment, digital transformation, blockchain, data and analytics, and AI and intelligent automation. Chris, you must be like 100 years old for that bio.
I was going to say you left out EIEIO, right?
Well, welcome to the show, my friend. I'm really excited to have you as the new co-host here, and it's a exciting time for the industry. We've been talking about digital transformation on this show for about a year and a half now. But with everything going on in the world of AI, I wanted to kind of bring this back, and nobody better than you. You've done this in the government sector and the private sector, and excited to have you part of this new season we're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Reminds me of that old Chinese curse, may you live in interesting times. I think we're definitely there. So.
Yeah, I don't want to say things were getting stale, but the automation world, certainly the RPA world, was kind of in this place of more and more automation getting pulled into broader digital transformation initiatives, and I really think, and I know you do, that the space has just exploded with all the generative AI stuff. So we're going to talk about that today. Before we jump in, as anybody who's watched the show before knows, we start with kind of headlines of the day at the intersection of business and technology. And so I kind of scour the news each morning, but you're on top of a lot of this stuff, Chris. Anything kind of catch your eye this morning?
Actually, I watched an interesting, not podcast, video by Zahan, Peter Zahan, I think his name is, phenomenal expert on demographics and the global economy and so forth. And he was talking about basically the demise of Germany as a not only a nation state but as an economic entity. Mostly because they were so heavily dependent upon Russian natural gas for all aspects of their infrastructure, their industry, the economy, that without it, between that and sort of demographic collapse, which is happening really worldwide, at least in the West, that Germany is going to be extremely challenged over the next 10 or so years to even remain relevant on the global stage. So I thought that was pretty interesting.
All right. Well, I'm sure I'm going to get a bunch of emails from our members in Germany to discuss and debate that on a future show. But no, interesting. There's a lot of that stuff going on right now. Outside of the terrible things going on, in the war and everything. But just like you say, kind of the changing landscape. I think a lot of the government regulations in EU are going to play a role. But for what's going on right now, I saw this piece, to kind of cover it from more of a technology standpoint, in Wired about kind of activists, hackers getting involved in the Israeli-Hamas war from both sides. It's easy to get pulled into the images that we're seeing come out of the Middle East right now, but we don't always think about what's happening not super visually, right?
Yeah, I mean, and Israel, arguably very rightfully so, declaring war for the first time in 50 years. The last time was the Yom Kippur War in 1973. And clearly rapid escalation across the region. So it's very interesting that, 2 years ago, we actually achieved a level of peace that no one thought was possible with the Abraham Accords. And now all of a sudden we're back at a state of war there. It's how rapidly things can change in this world.
So from a tech standpoint though, Chris, what's your sense? I mean, how much should we be concerned about this kind of warfare?
I think it's called fifth generation war. It is very asymmetric. It involves a lot of automation. I don't know if you've seen the videos of the guys using paragliders to fly across the border and so forth. Not unlike, or in fact very similar to the drone use of drones in the Ukraine war. So I think it represents and the importance of mass media as a channel for achieving what is really a political goal, right? Von Clausewitz in his book on war says, war is politics by another means. So I think that between the mass media, the use of technology to achieve, the political aims of your side is very represented in what we see going on there right now.
And the FTX trial started. So for all those that have been tracking the crypto world and everything that's gone on there, real interesting. It took about a minute and a half for his girlfriend and essentially business partner to turn on him. But I still, we talked about it on this show, when it happened, but I'm wondering not just crypto, but kind of the NFT marketplace and blockchain. I know you spend a lot of time in blockchain. Do you think this kind of slows down the progress there or changes kind of the trajectory of that space, that technology?
I would say yes and yes, but I think it's a natural progression, a natural evolution. You look at NFTs, and I was active in that a little over a year and a half ago. It just exploded on the scene. Everyone was making a ton of money off of it, and then all of a sudden they weren't. Pyramid schemes come in all forms and flavors, and that happened to be one of them. Although that's true really of all fiat currency, if we're honest about it. So the whole blockchain thing and crypto in particular, I think is not going away anytime soon. But I suspect you're going to see a lot of consolidation there, which is always true of a maturing, every maturing market, every maturing industry. And so there'll be a handful of players that really drive the whole market. I think that may also lead to a level of innovation, but it's going to take a while for that to happen. Because fundamentally, at least Bitcoin is not an efficient mechanism for payment. It's not a currency. It's really an asset. And I think there's a need for a currency design out there that will potentially one day get filled.
The other tech headline actually, it's a kind of couple headlines that caught my eye, are around Google. They've kind of sent out this notice that they're going to be cracking down big time on email spam. So it's going to change, from a user standpoint, what you get in your inbox, from a security standpoint, a spam standpoint. But for companies that are, marketing, it's going to change the game big time as far as how they market to, at least to consumers, right? With, through Gmail, and I'm not sure how it affects, corporate Google Mail, but and now they've announced basically they're doing away with passwords. They had kind of hinted at this a few months back around trying to push people towards pass keys, but now this pass key and some of the biometrics associated with it are actually going to be the default option when creating Google accounts.
Always a good sign to have greater security. I mean, the level of threat is always escalating, and certainly AI is going to make that 10 times worse. But you never get something for nothing in the technology arena. So yeah, we'll have potentially much better security from going this route with biometrics. I started working on biometrics in, I think, 1997 at Citibank. Having that very intimate personal information, whether it's a facial shot or whatever, being stored out there brings its own concerns from a privacy perspective. The conferences I was at last week, we did a lot of talk about privacy, and I know close to here out in Palm Springs this week is the eDiscovery Institute, their annual conference, and That's the kind of stuff they'll be talking about as well. So, in one hand, good news, you'll be more secure, you'll get less spam and less garbage in your email. Downside is, the privacy paradox. You're going to be giving up even more of your personal information, particularly in biometrics.
Yeah, and part of me, and maybe this is the skeptic in me, maybe this is the marketer in me, but part of me looked at, on the email side of things, is it going to be more secure and less spammy, and then ultimately create a better experience for the users? Yeah, maybe, but I couldn't help but think, who ultimately benefits from less email going to Gmail users? Google, right? Because if you're a marketer, now, how are you going to reach those users? You're going to have to spend ad dollars, right? Which has been challenging for them over the last few years.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we've been saying for decades, if you use the service for free, then you're for sale, right? And so when was the last time you ever sent a check to Google?
And as our viewers know, I'm usually pretty skeptical about regulation and, the most recent desires, at least in the US, of breaking Google up. But you see something like that, and you're like, okay, you're tightening up email, making it tough for people to market, and then you're benefiting from the ad sales side of things. So then all of a sudden it's like, okay, maybe there is some, monopoly antitrust angle there.
Now, if anyone has spent any amount of time in Washington, D.C., you would know how it works. And I assure you, nearly every congressperson has a Gmail account. So
interesting, right? So let's get to the main topic, which, a lot's been talked about. We've talked a lot about generative AI, but I've gotten a lot of really interesting questions over the last few weeks, kind of, comparing RPA, robotic process automation, and software automation, and even intelligent automation was the terminology that came out a couple of years ago, as you know, and generative AI, and kind of what are the differences and what's fueling what. And you were at a couple conferences on Gen AI over the last couple of weeks, so I think your information is probably as up to date as anything else. What's kind of the general census out there?
Yeah, so I did two different conferences last week, one for AIM and one for Information Governance Institute, and clearly the focus of the discussion was generative AI, and how do you bring some rationality and control about this? And I think the overwhelming theme was everybody's jumping on the boat and nobody really knows which way they're rowing. There's some inherent architectural shortcomings, you might call them, in the current generation of generative AI, and most people have no idea that that's the case. So you have people kind of running to the technology, implementing it, feeling fear of missing out, right? We don't want FOMO, we don't want to miss the boat on this. And by the same token, most people don't really understand how it works, what the underlying functioning is, what the math is, and so it should be a cause for concern for many people.
What strikes me, Chris, is, throughout my entire career, probably yours too, new technology would come out, companies would sell and market the heck out of it, and tech leaders would be skeptical and defensive about it, right? And I remember, first of all, the idea of cloud in highly regulated industries like financial services. We'll never go to the cloud. We'll never do that, right? As I'm sitting in San Francisco watching the Salesforce, the new Salesforce tower at the time, being built. And then, RPA, like I remember I probably told this story in the show before. I remember being, in a bank early on in the early days of robotic process automation, where we were doing an industry briefing for these banking execs. And, half an hour into the conversation, they stopped us and said, "This is unbelievable." And, we're like, "Oh, that's great. They like it. They get it." And he goes, "No, you don't understand. I don't believe you. I don't believe that this is going to do what you say it's going to do." Right now, you fast forward. I mean, the companies that are jumping into Gen AI, these aren't small companies. They're not necessarily even innovative companies. I mean, there's this article on LinkedIn today. I mean, Johnson & Johnson, Goldman Sachs, Walmart, Abbott. I mean, these are highly regulated, risk-averse companies, and they're jumping in.
I almost blindly, we talk about how generative AI is context blind. It literally has no idea when you're interacting with it. It has no idea what you're saying, what you're discussing. The way in which you ask your questions is what gives it context. So, you have a context blind technology, and it's almost like these companies that are leaping into it are themselves context blind. They're completely blind to the potential downsides of these technologies. And they're moving so rapidly that I think once they recognize that there's some shortcomings, inherent issues with it, just like RPA, just like any other technology, they might be too deeply vested, really, to recover from it. That's kind of the concern that I have, and certainly everyone in the information governance space. When we were talking about this last week, there's an increasing recognition that this is potentially gonna be a problem, and it's gonna be a problem soon.
I thought that was gonna not shut it down, but slow it down significantly. We've always talked about, even before AI, technology won't be the limiting factor. Company culture and politics, and these kind of things will end up being, people will be the slowdown. But if you believe that, McKinsey had this survey last month where they're saying, a quarter of executives are personally using AI at work, and 40% are saying their companies are increasing AI investments. And again, I'm surprised by the size and type of companies that are doing it. I thought that some of the stories you heard early on about people putting proprietary data into ChatGPT and then wondering why their competitors got it and losing their jobs over. I thought that stuff was gonna, and then the most recent regulatory issues, especially in Europe, but even in the US. There's one area where the US has actually been pretty close to EU on at least talking about regulation. So I thought this was all going to kind of shut down at some point or really slow down. But it doesn't seem like it is.
I saw earlier, I think over the weekend, I saw there was some survey, and I forget the number, but it was on the order of about 25 or 30% of board members that were asked their level of expertise with generative AI. 25 to 30% of them claimed that they were experts at this stuff. I'm like, really? I mean, I have 30 years of technology experience. I actually took math classes, right? And I'm trying to keep up to speed with it. But 1/3 of board members think they're experts at this stuff. I don't know if that is because it's being couched as overly simple, or people are just sort of deluding themselves. They don't want to admit that they don't understand it. Either way, it's not good.
Yeah, I mean, for Walmart's saying that they've rolled out a Gen AI powered tool to 50,000 non-store employees, and it's trained on corporate information. I guess the feeling is that if it's trained on isolated data sets, that they can kind of control the information that it's getting back. But I mean, this Johnson and Johnson, same thing. Abbott, same thing. I mean, these are not just risk averse companies, but they're heavy. The latter are very regulated companies. So you've done a lot in regulation too, Chris. What's the big concern? What's the real concern? I get, okay, exposing data and proprietary data and customer data, especially GDPR, sensitive Europe. But from a compliance standpoint, what are some of the main concerns you see?
So 2 points. What you just mentioned, like they're using focus data to solve a specific use case. People are calling that small language models now, and that actually is the correct way of using this stuff. It's the large language models where 200 million people can ask the most obtuse questions about the most obtuse topics, right? One person's going to ask about insurance policies, and someone else is going to ask about the Kardashians. And in those instances, like ChatGPT, you get the stupefaction. I mean, literally, ChatGPT is getting dumber the more people interact with it, and it's also getting optimally dishonest. We're training it to be as optimally deceptive as possible. It's a whole other discussion. But that actually does feed into the question about regulatory compliance and so forth. If you ask one of these technologies something, and it gives you an answer, are you yourself smart enough to evaluate whether or not that answer is true? And if you're not, and you're making business decisions off of that, it's a compliance nightmare. It's waiting to hand grenade on you. So a lot of people are looking at the technology as a way of replacing people, and it's not. It's a way of enhancing people. And in that case, you better be very selective about which of your people you're enhancing. It better be your best people.
Yeah, it brings up this interesting point, and that's the part I like about it, right? I feel like so much of innovation has been stymied by that resistance we talked about, and people not willing to see what's coming and become educated about it. I mean, the first 10 conversations I had about, AI in general, but certainly Gen AI was, oh, is it going to take jobs and those sorts of things? And then the answer that people seem to be okay with was, it's gonna not take your job. It's gonna enhance your job. And, you have to become kind of educated and trained, in this, but that I think is the opportunity, right? Where people, who, kind of missed the boat, in recent technology waves where, they're just almost unemployable now because they've fallen so far behind. Now this is democratized to a level where, anybody can play around with it and anybody can become familiar with it. And so if you pair your expertise with those types of tools, then then maybe you have something there where you become a better employee and not just doing work that can be automated, right?
Well, you're bringing up another, I think, critical point, and that is oftentimes, particularly in tech, we're focused on the very latest tools and how much experience you might have with the very latest tools, right? ChatGPT has been around, released for not even a year. Arguably, OpenAI has been around for 9 years. I get that. But you see job postings now must have 5 years of experience with ChatGPT. It's only been around for a year. What are you talking about? And the technology change, the rate of that change is accelerating. In my view, the more important thing is, do you have the fundamentals, right? Don't tell me that you know the latest language. Tell me that you understand software engineering. Tell me that you understand systems engineering. Tell me that you get mathematics and statistics, because we're insert new technology name here. It's going to be something different in a year. But if you have a deep understanding of those fundamentals, you're gonna be relevant no matter what the new technology is. And this is a conversation I've had with HR people, other executives in the tech space, and there's a general sense that that's becoming more true.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I thought was interesting. The CIO of Rocket Mortgage kind of said in this piece. They said, if you look at some of the spectacular failures that you've seen around Gen AI, most of them are asking extremely open-ended questions. And so they've apparently done some testing and found that if you invert that and you ask a lot of add a lot of context and narrow to a very specific question, that they're actually getting really good, accurate answers out of it.
Yeah, well, I talk about machine learning is just applied statistics. And AI is just applied statistics. So when you're interacting with ChatGPT, as you construct your questions or whatever, you're kind of going down a statistical rabbit hole, and eventually you can get no further with it. It can't respond anymore as you kind of narrow the pipe of statistical possibilities responding to you. So people talk about prompt engineering. I call it context provisioning, right? The way in which you ask the question is determinative of what response you get.
Sure.
And again, this means that I want smart people asking smart questions. If I have neophytes or not so smart people asking questions, you're going to get dumb responses, and you're going to act on those. So there's another study I think was out last week where 40% of the lowest 40% of employees are improved by the technology, and like the top 15% of employees don't really get a benefit. That's largely what you would expect. And interestingly, your best people, if you're using this technology correctly, your best people will actually become even more of a bottleneck in your business processes, right? Because all the front loading work that goes to your best people will happen almost automatically, and it's just going to get backlogged in front of them, waiting for them to catch up. So it's going to be an interesting quandary. And our definition of talent in the workplace, I think, is going to change substantially over the next 5 years because of it.
So, Chris, at the time we have left, back to the kind of initial premise, which is, hey, people have been, leveraging software automation, RPA RPA celebrates its 10-year anniversary this fall, later this fall. So it's been going around for a long time. And there was certainly at some point, maybe a year or two into it, we realized that, it was going to be tough to really do anything too transformative without AI, right? And that was before the terms intelligent automation and hyper automation were actually even in vogue, right? But what are you seeing? And some of these events you've been to, what are you seeing now as far as are people keeping Gen AI and RPA separate? Are they finding use cases together? Is one driving the other more than the other?
So I hate to age myself, but I started this automation stuff back in about 1993 with Lotus Notes. Not much has changed since then, to be very blunt. RPA worked when you had a very specific use case and you could define the rules that had to be followed in that use case, right? Which is why only about 5% of RPA implementations ever succeeded, because no one wanted to bother to write down the rules effectively. This is where AI comes in, right? If I know the result I'm trying to get, I can write a rule, I can use RPA. It's when I'm not sure of what I want to do that I need statistics. I need AI to take a best guess at what I should do next. So if most organizations weren't effective at using RPA, what's the chance they're going to be effective at using generative AI, right? I often say, skipping RPA and going to AI is like learning how to juggle with chainsaws instead of red rubber balls. I mean, if you can't do it with the red rubber balls, you probably shouldn't be doing it with chainsaws either. But it's the new shiny penny. It's the movie. Was it Christmas Vacation? Squirrel. The dog is always chasing the squirrel. So generative AI is the squirrel of the moment, and everyone's going to leap on. But again, as we see with every new wave of technology, only about 5%, 6% are going to be successful with it.
But don't you think this is more of a 1 + 1 = 3 scenario where you say, okay, I got automation to just automate a bad process or whatever over here. But now I've got, and maybe it's not Gen AI, maybe it's just general AI, not Gen AI, in the sense that now you got some intelligence. Now you've got multiple systems coming together, data that you couldn't really process in different silos and different parts of the organization now coming together. And then you add in some historic data, and maybe these automations actually are more effective now. No,
you're absolutely right. In some instances, it's going to be 1 + 1 = 12. And in other instances, it's going to be 1 + 1 = sludge, right? If anything else, AI is a phenomenal concentrator. Filter and concentrator, right? So, good stuff in, you're going to get great stuff out. You put garbage in, you're going to get really bad garbage out. So it puts even more of an onus on your systems people, your architects, in understanding the problem correctly and knowing what solution, where you want to end when you deploy. So yeah, the benefits are much higher, but the stakes are much higher as well.
Very exciting stuff, Chris. Very exciting stuff. Well, thanks again for joining the show. I'm looking forward to doing this with you. We'll be doing this first and third Wednesdays of every month, starting the first week of November, live noon Eastern, 9 Pacific. And we're offering free coaching sessions and state-of-the-industry briefings on a variety of digital transformation, automation, and AI use cases. Chris is also leading our training program. So if you need help, either in person or virtual training around intelligent automation, digital transformation, AI, data analytics, let us know. Go to network.irpaai.com. In the meantime, have a great week, everybody. Chris, travel safe, my friend.
Yeah, likewise. Cheers.